Gwen Florio, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We're catching you in Philadelphia, and I know there's big changes we're going to talk about coming soon, but you're out of you're in one of your many habitats, Gwen. You have many habitats, but recently just departed Missoula.
Right. I left, 4 days ago. I don't even know when now, but we drove across country to Philadelphia, where my son lives. And tomorrow we will be heading out of Philadelphia across the ocean, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
We will. And we'll talk about your deadline coming up and what the next, phase looks like. But drum roll, please. I mean, we rarely start off with this kind of drama, but we need to because it's such wonderful drama. Brand new review from the New York Times. I think it's about a week old or so at the most. At this point, you have an upcoming book coming out next week, I believe, is the publication date, The Least Among Us, and none less than the New York Times wrote the following 4 paragraphs. Gwen Florio is one of those writers who regularly publish series and standalones that have a lasting impression. Like her latest, The Least Among Us, the second book featuring the Duck Creek public defender Julia Geary, up to her neck in trouble. Consider what she's contending with: a relationship that's on the rocks thanks to her boyfriend's child custody issues, a loathsome intern who's been foisted upon her, and the imminent need to find a new place to live when her mother-in-law, widowed like Julia, announces her husband-to-be is moving in. Then there's her new client, Ray Belmar, whom she's defending on a public indecency charge, parentheses, he interrupted Duck Creek's raucous St. Patrick's Day parade wearing just a sock, which wasn't on his foot, close parentheses. When Ray is inexplicably charged in the death of a homeless man, Julia knows he's not guilty, but she's on the case for all of a few hours before her boss summarily removes her from it, making vague excuses. It's a lot to handle, though Julia does, even when things turn scary, very scary. There's a denouement straight out of a horror flick. End review. Wow.
Wow, indeed. That's not how I felt when I read it.
Yeah. New York Times, you've been reviewed in the Times before, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, several years ago now with my third novel, Disgraced, I got a very tiny blurb. And the pull quote was that they said I wrote gutsy novels, which was pretty great, but this is really great.
Yeah, really nice. What was the reaction? Did you hear from some people?
Just a few, and I think largely because my mother sent it to every single person she knew, including high school teachers of mine. So really crazy gratifying. I even heard from people who don't know my mom, which was really gratifying. And yeah, I was just shocked. I had no idea it was coming and was doing the thing where I woke up in the middle of the night and was scrolling through my phone. And I always read the Times book review when it comes out. And so that resulted in me waking up my husband at 1:30 in the morning saying, oh my God, you won't believe this.
Wow.
Yeah.
We both know how many mystery books are published every year. It's thousands and thousands, and to be singled out, pretty much that's the way it feels, by the New York Times, who, they do a column every month. Sarah, I think, does a column, doing 4 or 5, and maybe there's some other mentions here and there, but it must feel great. Yeah,
it was amazing. It really, I may have read it 50 times, maybe 100 times. But yeah, great. And I went out and got a hard copy. The one good thing about being on the road, we can't get the physical copies of the Times in Missoula. They don't deliver it. So it was great to be able to actually go out and get it and hold it in my hands.
That's great. Well, while we're on The Least Among Us, why don't we dive in just a little bit more and tell us about this story. And this is the second one in this series?
It is, yeah, and it features a public defender who is a young woman who's a war widow. Her husband was killed in Iraq. So she's juggling a lot of things, as being a lawyer, being a single mom, etc.
Right. And we've got the sort of rough overview in the New York Times there, but tell us what inspired this particular plot line.
Actually, a trial I covered many, many years ago. It involved two transients accused of beating a third to death. And I don't want to say too much about it because it would give away the plot of the book, but I was really struck by the way the trial was handled and the way these guys made very easy targets for charges being filed. And the police investigation seemed to have been not as thorough as it might otherwise have been had a solid citizen been involved. And again, I think this happened in like 2012, 2013, maybe, but it just stuck with me all those years.
Huh. Now, is Julia based on a real life character, somebody you knew, or is she sort of a composite, or somebody you developed just out of your toolbox?
Not a real life character, but for several years, I covered what we called the cops and courts beat at the Missoulian newspaper. And I would sit in court every day and watch these public defenders come in with just stacks and stacks of cases. And then the, middle class or wealthier people who ended up in court always had private attorneys who had nice suits, and they had aides carrying, their cases in a little trolley. And it was, when the public defenders prevailed, it was pretty impressive. And so I think my natural instincts were to sympathize with them as the underdogs. What I did not think about when I chose a public defender as my protagonist was that with the prosecutor, you have someone who's naturally going after the bad guy. With the public defender, they have to defend someone who they think who's been labeled the bad guy, but their job is to prove that the person is not. And then for sake of a novel, they have to find out who actually did it. So I created more hoops for myself to jump through.
Wow, nice. And research-wise, I mean, you obviously had a lot of professional experience to draw on, just having covered and been involved in those kinds of scenes. Did you feel like you needed to do anything to sort of add to that and make sure you're up to date with what's currently happening?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it became painfully aware to me as I was working on this that I'm not a lawyer, but I spent a lot of time scrolling through the Montana Code annotated, looking up specific charges, specific penalties, that sort of thing. I have friends who are attorneys, so I talked to them and just said, could this actually happen in this way, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Thank God, because it's a little, it's like with anything. If you write as though you have expertise, you better not get anything wrong. It's like writing about guns. You can't get it wrong. So far I haven't heard complaints, and I'm sure if I screwed up something, I'll hear about it.
Well, the first book did very well. The Truth of It All, right? That's the first one in that series. And I love that book. I really enjoyed that story quite a bit. Yeah, it was really good, memorable. And you really just have a great way of just making sure the domestic complications, the work complications, the actual case she's working on complications, they're just all this kind of ongoing tumble for your main character. Yeah.
With this character, I really drew on my own memories. I was a single mom for many years, also in a very demanding profession as a journalist. And there was just this constant tension of trying to get all of your work done around a daycare and school schedule that is very unforgiving of anything beyond the 9 to 5 routine that some lucky people have, but I did not. And so it was always, am I going to get things done before I have to race to the daycare center before it closes at 6 and they start charging you, incrementally more each 15 minutes, that kind of thing. So a little bit of PTSD involved in writing about this.
And pretty easy to tap that feeling, I guess, and just go back and harvest that emotion.
Yeah, very much so.
So the Least Among Us is book 2, and do you have another book due in that series?
I hope so. I don't have a contract for another one yet, but I'm hoping this Times review might give me an edge in that regard.
Did you hear from your editor after that came out?
I have not, but again, it's vacation time.
Yeah,
It came out over Thanksgiving weekend. So hoping to hear, I did hear from someone in the publishing house and also from my agent. They were pretty tickled.
that's great. And you're with Crooked Lane, right, for this
Yes.
series, right? And you're happy with what they've done to support you?
Oh my gosh, very much so. Yeah. I mean, I think the books themselves are beautiful. I really like the cover of this one. It looked kind of ominous and had that kind of sense that, you have a woman walking down what looks like a pretty dark and scary alley, which is where transients hang out. It's where a lot of the book takes place, is sort of their haunts. And they're always a little forbidding, especially at night in the wintertime. So it really conveyed that sense.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you've got the other series, Nora Best series, and you have a
Yes,
deadline coming up for that.
I do. And my publisher was nice enough to extend it a little, but January 31st, I will have a fourth book sent to them come hell or high water.
And book 3 just came out like in the summer or early
It's
fall?
in August, I want to say.
Okay. And tell us about that, because we've got so much ground to cover here, but we may as well.
So that one, again, I drew on an actual case or situation. And it is in the book, my protagonist goes to work at a school for troubled teens, a program, maybe is a better way to put it. These programs abound throughout Montana and the Mountain West, largely in states where there's not a lot of regulation. In Montana, there's almost none. And my newspaper did a deep dive into that situation a few years ago and actually got some laws changed to put a little more regulation. But as you well know, as a former journalist, sometimes you feel like you only skim the surface, no matter how, again, we spent a year working on this series and I still felt like we didn't get as deep as I would have liked. And, well, in fiction, man, I can make it up. All the people, all the interviews I could get in fiction. And I was just so appalled by that situation that it could be allowed to happen, and set the book in one of those schools. And what made it really enjoyable for me was I got to write about teenage girls. This particular program was for girls, and teenage girls can be creatures from hell. And they were just vastly entertaining to me in their, not just their meanness, but then their unexpected generosity and their smarts about dealing with things. Nora, my protagonist, was a little naive about bending the rules, and these girls knew how to take the rules and just turn them into figure eights to their advantage.
And set up Nora Best for us. Tell us about her.
Yeah, so she is a woman who is 50. I guess she's in her early 50s by now. She was 50 in the first book, which involved her leaving a marriage very abruptly when she walked in on her husband and her best friend, and tearing off with an Airstream trailer. And she sort of travels around to different situations. And each book concerns a different social issue. Nora and her Airstream are the through line, I guess, to that.
Yeah. And what is her leverage into a story? What is her role in terms of uncovering a mystery then?
She, again, is sort of an amateur sleuth. She walks into a situation that she's not familiar with. She doesn't have a lot of experience. She's hired on as almost like a teacher's aide. And so much as any person would be in that situation, she sees things that she doesn't quite understand. And she thinks, man, this looks weird. But again, I don't know how these things work. Maybe I'm wrong. She has to learn how to trust her instincts. And I think that's a situation a lot of us can deal with. When you get that little spidey sense, this doesn't seem right, but what do I know? Yeah. And then, when she realizes, yeah, it's that bad, as a moral person, you have to do something about it. And in this case, doing something about it really puts her, not just her in danger, but the girls in danger. And that's where writing these really gets fun.
You find it a little more freeing to write about an amateur sleuth because you don't have to worry about all the, the kind of rules that your public defender might be kind of constrained by?
Yes and no. I think writing about each has advantages. Sometimes I miss the rules because then I would have some structure, and Nora has to be a little more clueless sometimes than I would like her to be. Sometimes I just want to shake her a little and say, "Don't you see what's happening?" She's fun to write because as an older woman, she doesn't have children. She no longer has a husband, and she has a kind of freedom that my other protagonist does not. My other protagonist has a child and a job, and she's really kind of hemmed in by things, and Nora can kind of do whatever she wants to. So that makes her fun to write.
Is it fun to go back and forth from two different characters?
Theoretically, it actually is. And the way I do it, last year I had 2 books due within the space of a year, which was the first time I dealt with that. And so what I did was I wrote the rough draft to one, and then I wrote the rough draft to the other, and then I went back, and really having that gap between them, going back and taking a fresh look at it actually worked really well, rather than diving back into it immediately. Because you know how it is, you take some time away and you develop a little bit, some calluses, you're not quite so in love with your work, and it's easy to see the places where it doesn't work and fix them, I hope.
What is your daily routine look like? I mean, this sounds like you're enormously productive, obviously, and you must be super focused and just have a drill.
Yeah, I wish. No, I have the great benefit of being retired, and that makes all the difference in the world. So I pretty much write as soon as I get up in the morning. And I want to say that takes me till about lunchtime, at which point my brain is starting to melt down. And then I'll spend the afternoon, either doing other writing related things, or maybe going back and doing some editing, but not doing the writing. But yeah, mornings are my happy time in terms of writing. What happens at the very end when I'm doing a final draft, then I'm just like tunnel vision. I'm working on it all the time, as long as I can. I've been really lucky to have some writing residencies, during that final time where you just, you're removed from your own environment and you've got nothing to do but work on your project. And that's really helpful.
One last summer in Alaska, which looked amazing.
It was fabulous. It was just an incredible experience, incredible support from the program, incredible other residents. The landscape did not suck.
Yeah.
That was great.
It just looked like a dream. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and maybe I'm talking out of school here, but in addition to producing these 2 novels this year, basically, I know the one now is due in January, and you had the other one come out, but so when we met in Albuquerque at Left Coast Crime, and I know we saw each other also in Minneapolis at BoucherCon, which was great to get back into the conference groove a little bit this year. I believe, if I remember correctly, you also had a little kind of a special novel there, or something you were working on the side as well.
Yeah. And that I've kind of put on hold for a little bit.
Okay.
And my agent was not as wild about that thought that I had. And he said something really interesting. He said, I thought I was going to work on a novel where I actually outlined for the first time in my life. I was going to have structure, and I was going to walk in knowing what I was doing, and I wanted it to be kind of buzzy and whatever. And he's like, you're not writing from your heart. And I thought that was a really good observation. And so I kind of pulled it back. I thought about, what is it about this story that it was much more plot driven than anything I've usually done. And I almost felt as though I was being told to ditch the outline, which maybe I'm, reading too much into that, but there was that sense. So I actually make little notes to myself about it and send them to myself. So I think it's going to happen. It's just going to happen in a very different way.
That idea is still marinating, obviously.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, you really have a good trusting relationship with your agent then.
I love my agent. Yeah, he has just been fabulous throughout. And really, I don't know how many agents do this. He's been an excellent editor agent. And I think I'm really privileged to have that. You know, the couple times he's looked at a manuscript and said, yeah, you know, this isn't quite working, or maybe this should be moved. He was absolutely right on the money.
So the book that's due on January 31st, are you building in time for him to read it before it goes to them?
Not so much. That's the Nora books, and he's pretty much passed those along.
Okay.
And likewise with the public defender books. But this one, I was trying something new, so I wanted to show it to him first. And I think when I pick it up again and work on it some more, I will do the same thing. I'll write 3 or 4 chapters and maybe an outline or at least a synopsis and send it along to him and get his thoughts on it.
Wow. And what is the working title of the one that's due in January?
It is Best Be Prepared. My protagonist is Nora Best, so all the titles should have the word best in them, which is really stretching me, but Best Be Prepared, I can't even say it, I'm sorry. Best Be Prepared works well for this one.
Yeah, Best Laid Plans was at the, let's see, let's review the titles.
Best Laid Plans, Best Kept Secrets, Best Practices, and now Best Be Prepared.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned covers a minute ago, and it seemed to me there was sort of an interesting, you know, for the public defender cover, you had a woman from the back with her long flowy hair, and for one of the Nora Best books, you had a woman from the back with her hair. And it's like, did you use the same artist here or what?
Oh, for all of the Nora Best books, they have the woman with the long flowy hair. And then when Crooked Lane sent me the cover mock-up for The Truth of It All, likewise, the woman with the long flowy hair from the back. And I call them the shampoo commercial covers. And I said, you know, these other books with my name on them have very similar covers. And they were like, whatever, okay. So, I mean, in the one, she has auburn hair, and the other, it's more brown. I guess that's the difference, but it was just interesting. I'm sure far smarter people than I come up with these, and there's a reason for it.
Yeah. Well, Gwen, I've known you long enough to know, remember when you were unpublished.
So unpublished, yes.
Yeah, and you had been writing for a long time, and you know, trying to get in. I think I was about to be published, maybe for the first time or something like that. And you know, you were asking about it. We were making normal writer pal commiseration stories and talking about our work in it. Can you even think back to that person who was unpublished and look ahead to, you know, how many projects you're juggling now in the middle of 2 contracts, and just what are your thoughts?
It just never ceases to amaze me. I basically, even in the midst of despair, in the middle of a novel where things inevitably bogged down, I feel like the luckiest person in the world. You know, before I got that first book published, you know, I had this little writer prayer, like, please, 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 just let me publish one book and I will die happy. And I'm on book 11, which seems incredible to me. And to this day, if I walk in a bookstore or a library and I see my book on the shelves, or, you know, I see someone reading my book, that's just astounding to me. So I just, again, feel very, very lucky. And when I talk to aspiring writers, I just want to say, hang in. You know, it's so worth it. It is really worth it.
And hang in is one thing. I guess the obvious message in hang in is keep writing.
Absolutely.
Is there any other aspect to it other than just putting more words on the page? Is there, if you look back and see how the contracts came together and how you developed relationships, you know, there's got to be a little bit more to it than just sitting in a room, dark room writing. It's got to be, there's more to it.
Yeah, I think the feedback is really important. I mean, all those rejections that stack up, I found several of them when I was packing up. I recently moved, and they were not bad rejections. But they were correct in what they saw as the flaws in what I was writing. So it's really important, I think, to take that sort of feedback, whether from rejection from an agent or an editor, or from a beta reader, or from a writing group. I got better. I went back and found my first unpublished novel, and I read it. I was like, oh my God, I wouldn't publish this now. So going to conferences, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, I think, is really good on a lot of the nuts and bolts of writing and getting better, and networking with people is super important. Again, the conferences are an investment, but I found them to be an investment that has always paid off. Almost in karma terms, I come away from every single one having learned something that I can apply to my writing. So it's just kind of be a sponge. You got to read a lot, you got to write a lot, you got to network, you got to get that feedback. There's a lot you have to do. But I liken it to, to being in grad school or something. You don't walk in on day one and be an expert in your field. You got to learn all the things.
Yep. Very good. It's awesome. Well, congratulations, book 11. Wow.
Yeah.
So the 11 are out, or the one that goes in January will be 12? Or?
I think the one that goes in January will be 11. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. There's so many, it's hard to count. I know. Yeah. That's great. All right. So big change of topics here, but you are on your way overseas, as you mentioned. Wow, big moment to just pull up roots and go find a new place to view the world, and also a new place to write, although I know you've done some writing overseas before.
Right. Yeah. But this will be different. Yeah, we just, it was one of those things where we have talked about this over the years, and it's like, and we can just keep talking about it forever and we can do it. So we sold the house, sold one of our vehicles, put everything in storage. We're going to be in Italy for 2.5 months and then bounce around. We've got friends in Barcelona. We've got friends in Germany. We'd like to go to Scotland for a few months, see how it goes, see how the writing goes, see what the United States looks like from far away. I'm very interested in that change in perspective. Yeah. How did you pick the place in Italy where you decided to head? Actually, we had a tour plan for many months before we made these decisions. Myself and my husband and his daughter, my brother and my cousin are all going to Sicily. And so we just thought, let's just cancel our return tickets and stay in Sicily. And the way I picked the town where we're going, I went to Airbnb and plugged in the entire island of Sicily and put about a zillion criteria in there, and ended up in the town of Marsala, which is on the far western tip. I think it's the closest town to Africa. It's across the water from Tunisia. It's a town about the size of Missoula, which was my hometown until last week. So I think that should feel familiar. And I'm just really looking forward to settling in one place and kind of getting to know it. And also a lot of writing done. It has a good writing space, or at least it looks like it does.
That's great. Wow. A little bit of, just the wonderful kind of uncertainty of not knowing exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah. I think that's going to be good for both of us. We talked to friends yesterday who spent a year in Krakow on a Fulbright, and they just said, you learn to be really flexible. When things are not what you expect, or, things change, you just change with it.
Yeah. What does making this kind of a decision and sort of seeing all this upheaval, the packing, the moving, the driving cross country, the planning, as you're going through that process, how much of that pours back into your fiction, do you think? Or are they two separate things?
That's a really good question, and I hadn't thought about it this way, but I think the way it does is I force my protagonist to make really big decisions, and in some cases, life and death decisions. But luckily, this is not, but it is a major life change and pretty intimidating. And we just sort of jumped in, and then, it's like being thrown into the deep end. You got to keep swimming. So I think I will draw on that sense of, oh my God, what have we done? Well, we can't undo it. So, here we go. Yeah. And I have a much stronger feel for a sense of panic than maybe I did a few weeks ago.
Yeah. One thing that I appreciate about travel or change in general is just how your senses, you're seeing things differently. When you stay in the same place, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but you tend to become so familiar with even sights, sounds, feelings. You know every little squeak in the house and whether it's something to pay attention to or not. But moving and finding a new digs and figuring out new kind of systems and how your life is supported. New doctors, new, all that.
Things,
Puts you in a different space.
It does. And then I'm curious as to how, if I'm writing about somewhere in the States, that will look, because I think it was Flannery O'Connor who couldn't write about the South until she moved away from the South. And that's when she really found her groove, and of course kept doing it when she returned. But I wonder whether I'm going to be writing about this new place or places back home with a new perspective.
Yeah, that's great.
But I think you're right. You'll have that heightened awareness that's got to just, I think you can kind of fall back on some writing tricks, I guess, or just some familiar places. And I want to be out of my comfort zone. And I think I will be deeply out of my comfort zone in the next few weeks.
I don't know if your particular itinerary and what you got planned in terms of Italy and maybe Germany, Scotland, whatever, if that qualifies you as an expat, soon to be expat, but I'm not sure what the exact definition, but what about potentially, and maybe in the back of your head is an idea of perhaps you'll run into a setting where you need to drop an expat in and start a story.
I hope so. And I think Sicily might be that setting. I've been to Italy a few times now. It's my ethnic background and I just love it there. So I'm trying to think, what could someone do in this situation, surrounded by Italian inefficiency, which is sort of legendary, but also, Italian charm, which is also legendary.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but I'll definitely be on the lookout.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on all of this, Gwen, and congratulations on the big move. And I did not set you up for this or remind you that we always close by recommending a book or a writer in terms of just paying it forward and recommending. So have you read anything recently you care to recommend, or is there a writer you've really been consuming a lot of lately you'd care to share a name?
Yeah, a couple of things, one old and one new. Ed Amar, who writes as E.A. Amar. I just got an advance copy of his new book, which comes out, I think, in January, No Home for Killers. Very extremely badass female protagonist, which I mightily enjoyed. And then I am reading a book that's been out for a long time by John STRALEY, who's an Alaska writer, and it's called Cold Storage, Alaska. I'd read one of his books years ago, and every so often I'd see his name and think, oh yeah, I got to read that guy. I got to read that guy again. And it came up on BookBub. And I'm really enjoying that because it's set in a really different part of Alaska than where I was. I think it's set around Sitka. Anyway, it's raining all the time there. And, the setting, the characters, all the things. I like books that put you in a place and make you feel like you know something about that place by the time you're done. So I'm sure there are more, but I haven't been reading much lately because I've just been packing and packing and packing. Yeah. But every so I feel like I'm actually cheating on all the work I have to do when I sneak off and read for a little while. It's just delightful.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Gwen Florio, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast, and maybe we'll do an international interview next. Who knows?
Right.
All
I'll
right.
sit on the piazza with a little cup of cappuccino and we'll chat.
That'd be great. Thank you, Gwen.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. See ya.